Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.
So tell me about why your company is a public benefit corporation instead of like an LLC or whatever else.
We're going to need a whole nother session for that.
Yeah, okay. I figured. We'll do the short version here.
Yeah, the short version is originally I thought about creating designEDengagement as a nonprofit, and pre George Floyd, a lot of funding was definitely not coming to underrepresented founders like myself. So I was like, let me make it a for-profit, and it's a social impact organization. And then what I decided is, or have now decided, is that I do still really need to create a nonprofit from the equity and access opportunity, but it's a for-profit organization that has a social impact focus.
Yeah.
That's a short version.
Yeah. So it's interesting because the public benefit corporation, or B Corp, I believe is what it's commonly referred to as, is a way to say that you're making money from what you're doing, but that it's not all about that, or what's the difference there?
Yeah, that you are focusing your work and efforts into making society better, and you're designating your work as such. Whereas I think a lot of for-profit organizations do contribute to society. I think this is just like another layer to say it's designed with that intent.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a little bit of virtue signaling going on there. Like, let me tell you how great I am by saying that this is my purpose and I'm not just here to make money. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think the B Corp entity is newer in our field. And I think in education, there's this like idea that you cannot do great work if you're like in a for-profit setting. And there's a lot of conversation around that. So I think that's like the root of it. For me, let me see. I think it's important to know that you're running a business, whether you're running a nonprofit or you're running a for-profit. And if there's something to signal to folks that, yes, it's a social impact, I mean, why not?
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting is in education, we often have a weird relationship with money. And as educators, we complain about not getting paid enough, but then we also are afraid to ask for more money. And there's all kinds of stuff around this that obviously we're not going to go into. But as I've gotten into the nonprofit world myself, in being the executive director of a nonprofit and founding a nonprofit, all the same things apply. You have to provide value to people to get them to give you money. And the thing in education that we struggle with is that it's so far removed from getting money that we think that all the money is just going to be there no matter what. And, we saw with COVID, when kids withdrew from school in huge numbers, that the money wasn't always going to be there. We saw in the financial crisis of 2008, it took a couple of years, but we also saw that the money wasn't always going to be there because a lot of schools are funded through property taxes. And then when home values decreased so much, then it wiped out our funding. And those kinds of things are real, but we just don't see it that way. So the fact that you're a public benefit corporation, I think, is really fascinating and interesting, and something that I'm a nerd about a lot of things. And so I just like to see where people are coming from with that.
No, absolutely. And I definitely want to elevate what you said around education and us not talking about money on that front. I definitely think that as educators, we should demand getting paid equivalent to the contribution that we are making into society. And I'm not an educator any longer. I guess I could say a lifelong educator because I still teach through my work. But in my book, I allude to it. In articles, I talk about it. We should definitely be advocating for higher pay that is equivalent to that contribution. So we could have another conversation about that, but I know it's,
Well, the good thing about my podcast is that because it's mine, we can go in whatever direction we want. So I think what we should start with, though, we got people's curiosity piqued with that first question, but let me just ask you first, who are you? What do you do? This is Marcela Andrés, who's on the Transformative Principal podcast. Not how we typically start the podcast, but I think I'm going to keep all that. And it was a fun way to start. We'll see how it goes. Tell us about what you do and who you are.
Yeah. And so I'll start with who I am. I'm the proud daughter of immigrants. My mother is from Atotonilco, Nieves, Zacatecas, Mexico. It's a mouthful. I want anybody to practice that. And my father is from Havana, Cuba. And so two immigrants from two different Latin American countries that represent two different struggles. And I bring that into my work and my identity because it really informs how I lead. And when they immigrated to this country, was cycled into poverty because of many different layers, but primarily not knowing how to navigate systems, including the educational system. And another reason is that my father left when I was really young. So my mother didn't have that additional parent to support us. And so she relied on herself, she relied on her community, and she relied on educators to take us from a very dismal situation to one that has really that continues to have me in disbelief. Like, I feel like I live in two parallel worlds during this lifetime. And I firmly believe that when individuals come together, and specifically those that are closest to children, educators, families, and community members, they're going to thrive. And now there's 50 plus years of research like proving that evidence, but I know it through my lived experience. I know it through the life that I'm living right now. And the life that I'm living right now is I'm the owner of designEDengagement, which, we'll talk about later. I'm an author of the book called Purposeful Educator Connections. I invest in real estate. I travel the world. And again, none of that would have been possible. One, had my parents not had dreams, but two, had people not come together to champion my dreams.
Well, I appreciate that little introduction. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is this idea of identity, of who we are. And when I was a principal and got pulled out of my school 6 weeks before the end of the school year, my identity was tied up in being a principal. And when that was ripped away from me, then caused me to become really depressed. And I had forgotten who I really am. And a principal is what I do. It's not who I am. And so too much we focus on identity being the color of your skin, your race, your sexual orientation. And really those are just small parts of who we are. And when we focus solely on those, we put up the roadblocks that don't have to be there. What's your take on that?
100%. Like, you get to create who you are and your identity. And I think because we live in such a capitalistic society, myself included, I sometimes tend to be like, oh, I'm this as my work, but I'm much more of a complex identity. Like, yes, daughter of immigrants, but I'm also a dancer. I'm also somebody who loves to cook. I love improv. I love all these different things. And sometimes I find myself in Colombia and I feel like I'm Colombian as a side thing. So I do think that it's complex and that it would benefit us to bring all those different layers forward to just have really rich conversations and ultimately human connection with other people.
Yeah, and that's really the key, is that connection that we then create. If I didn't know that you invest in real estate, then I might not ever ask a very specific question. If I didn't notice that your company designEDengagement is a public benefit corporation, I would have never gone down that path of asking about that and never would have gotten that information. And so, especially in this world where you mentioned a capitalistic society, but especially in the work you and I do, where we are online and connecting with people, there's a lot of people saying you need to really define who you are and say, like, I am, for example. So let me just tell a little bit about myself, because you don't really know me. So I love podcasting. I love creating them. I love helping other people create them. And I help people create podcasts. But that's not like all that I do. But I do think that if anybody is at least a little bit curious about anything, I can help them create an amazing podcast that's going to get in the top 10% worldwide. and encourage them to be part of doing it for a long time, that it's not just like I'm going to do 10 episodes and I'll be done, but really continuing it. And that's a skill that I've developed over time from doing my own podcast and interviewing other people and things like that. So I also do consulting. I'm curious about AI and programming, but I'm not like a data scientist or a AI researcher or even a programmer at all. But I'm curious about those things and I understand some of them. And so I get these interesting topics that I follow online and learn about, and that enables me to do all these things that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Mhm.
More importantly than all those is my faith and my family. Those things are way up there and exceptionally important. And it's so easy to let those things fall down by the wayside. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we have principals who are listening and other educators who are listening who are not totally sure what their thing is. And for me, when I go into a situation, I typically know exactly what I want out of it. For example, our conversation today, I want to talk with you about high level things that are going to help me be a better human being overall. To be honest, looking through the stuff you sent over for us to prepare, I was like, boy, I'm really sick of talking about just education stuff today, and I don't want to do it. So maybe my mood is putting you at a disservice that this is going to be a wide-ranging conversation. But the good news is you like improv, so we're going to make it work, right?
Yes, and all the things. And
Yeah.
also, my first career is not in education, so we can talk all things, definitely.
Oh, excellent. That's very good. So I want to stay on this idea of having your own identity, because if you
Mhm.
have your own identity and you know what you're doing and you know what your vision is for your life, then it helps you in other areas. Now, I am going to be kind to our listeners who are most likely principals or educators and talk about that in the frame of having a job as a school leader and knowing what you're trying to do so that you can then communicate that to others. And I've got some thoughts on this, but I'll let you share your thoughts first and then we'll riff off of that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds fantastic. And I absolutely love principals and the work that they do. Formally stepped into education. I just developed a strong heart for principals. And I think that our system does not do a good job of affirming who they are in our society. If we don't do a good job of affirming teachers, for sure,
Mhm.
principals, right? So definitely want to talk about who I think, and the research shows us principals are in the lives of children. And so with that, I would say community leaders. Like when you think about a school, it's nestled within a community, and principals are the individuals that bring educators, bring families, bring students, bring larger community members into the schoolhouse through their leadership. They're the epitome of leadership, of creating the next generation through how they develop and invest in individuals. And I think that we need to continue investing in principals and their transformative work.
Yeah, so tell me about why that role is so important and what their own identity has to do with success in that role.
So I think a lot in systems, and you could probably see it like systems, relationships, outcomes, and education is a large system, right? And you have your board, you have your superintendent, and then you have a superintendent that oversees multiple schools. And really, at the schoolhouse is how a community, or rather, a school is nestled within a community. And it requires a leader, again, to bring people together to achieve a mission. And that mission is to develop the next generation of thinkers, which yields the next generation of doctors, lawyers, innovators, and God knows what other career fields are going to come out in 20 years. And so, with that, these system level leaders, these community leaders are essential to developing their talent, to developing their students, and also curating the partnerships that transpire inside of the schoolhouse. Now, why is their identity really important? I think it goes to purpose, but it also goes to knowing who they are so that they can show up in their most authentic way. And so it does not serve anyone if a principal comes with this figurative coat, if you will, and saying, I am the principal, this is what we're doing, right? A leader, I think by definition, is I'm here and I want to bring you here or even further than what I am. And the way you do that is exactly what we were talking about earlier, is like really opening up yourself to share who you are, where you come from, what you believe in. That could be on a religious front, that could be on a political front, that could be on, movie front, so that people can connect with you and know that you're a human being and that you want the best for the community that you serve.
Mm-hmm. And so what I really appreciate that you said there is, number one, is that school is nestled within a community. And if you're in a traditional public school, then that is a physical community because you have geographic boundaries. But if you are in a charter school or a private school, then, or a micro school, then that is a different kind of community that is more intentional. And that is important as well. So just because you, like, if you're listening to that and you're like, oh, well, we're a charter school or private school, that doesn't apply to us. Yes, it does. But the difference is that community is more self-directed. Although I have heard from a lot of charter school leaders that they still get the bulk of their students from those that live right around the school because it's very convenient for the kids to be able to walk to school or to be dropped off on the way to work. So within a community, I think that's a key point. And you said that they need a leader who can help guide the vision and have a vision for that school. And this is where I think it's so important for a leader to know themselves, because when they speak things that they really believe, then it comes across as authentic. When a principal says the district is making me do this, then it doesn't come across as authentic, and everybody knows that it's a lie, and people only go along to get along or because they don't want to upset the apple cart. And then, like, what's the point of you even being there if you're so here's an example. This is one of my favorite examples. I really despise the educational testing complex that we have in education. We spend way too much money on it and it's too expensive. We're not going to go all into that. But I understand that it needs to happen. And so I'm going to, as a principal, let it happen, but I'm not going to devote extra and additional resources to it that are not necessary for the fulfillment of it. So in 2016 or so, I was principal in Alaska, and we were adopting a new type of testing software, and everybody was freaking out and saying, we need to spend all this time doing it. And my stance was, if it's so difficult that we have to practice using the software time and time again, then we should not be adopting it. And so we're not going to practice how to use the software over and over. We are going to do one time where we log in and make sure that it works on all the computers. And that's pretty much it. We're not going to devote days and days to doing this, which is what the plan was. And they also said, we have a month-long testing window and we need to do it as soon as possible so we have plenty of time for makeups. And my response was, no, we're going to do it as late as possible so that our kids have as much instructional time as possible before the test. And then we're not going to have any time for makeups because we're not going to be chasing kids the whole entire month trying to get them to do something that they obviously are trying to avoid. And so that was the stance I took. And because I believed it, my superiors didn't fight me on it. And the teachers said, okay, we can get on board with that. That's fine. And what was amazing that happened is that I ended up looking like a total genius, because after the first week of testing at the University of Kansas, where this was housed, a fiber optic cable got cut and they had to cancel testing for the whole entire state because all of it was coming out of that central location.
Wow.
And I say this because that was not a disappointment to me, because I was acting in alignment with my values and what I thought was so important. Mm-hmm. And I was clear about it so people knew where I stood. And that's a really specific, fortunate case in my situation. That's what happened. They're not all fortunate like that. But being so clear about what I believed and what was important to me really made a difference in how we took action and made decisions. How else do you see that happening, or other examples that you have that you'd like to add to that?
I mean, that summarizes so nice. It's like your conviction about it, right? And it
Yeah.
sounds like you were going away from that compulsory part. Like, okay, I'm going to do what I need to do, but really what I need to do is connect with children and connect them to the learning that needs to happen. And that's 100% what I think a leader should do in these circumstances. And sometimes, like you said, it doesn't end favorably, but being a leader is a risk, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
about some of this stuff as I put out some thought leadership around, like, well, what if somebody says, like, well, what's your stance on immigration? Like, I'm daughter of immigrants. Like, what do you want my stance to be? And you have to, at some point, be willing to risk it all, because if not, internally, you're not going to be okay with yourself. You do not
Mm-hmm.
want to live with the what if, and you don't want to live with like that burden of not doing right by yourself, by your inner person. Excuse me. And you don't want to, live by not doing right by the people that you are called to lead and
Mm-hmm.
honor and support. And so in your case, of course, it was favorable, but there are times that they're not going to be favorable. And as long as you can sleep at night, I think that's what matters.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, the time that it wasn't favorable was several years later when I got pulled out of my school.
Mm,
And the main reason that I got pulled out was because I was following the rules, but not in the way that the rules were written. I found a loophole and took advantage of it. And what was happening was I wanted students to have real, authentic learning experiences. And so one student group wanted to go to an animal shelter and volunteer their time there. And I said they could do it during the school day. They did a bunch of stuff that still made learning happen, but we couldn't afford to send them there on a bus. And so I said, we can't do it because we can't get you transportation there. And they said, well, our parents could take us. And I said, yeah, your parents can check you out. That's allowed. But your parent, like, we can't authorize other people driving you around. Like, that's not gonna work. And the teacher can't do it. And they said, and they thought about it and they talked about it and they said, well, what if each of our other parents are emergency contacts, then we can leave with that person. And I said, that's right. That's within the rules. An emergency contact can check someone out at any time. And this was the big thing that got me pulled out of the school, was that I was allowing these students to do this. And my superintendent was like, you can't do that. And I asked why not. And she said, because that's not how we do things. And I said, well, the policy says that emergency contact can take them out, and the policy says that they can be engaged in extracurricular activities during the school day, and the policy says that it can happen and that a teacher can't transport them. So I'm following all the policies and doing everything within the policies that we have. And she said, well, that's not what it was intended to do. And I said, well, that's not the problem. Then the problem is that you don't like that we did this and that we found this
mm,
loophole. And that was the case. She didn't like that we found a loophole. And that's what made her upset in that situation. And
mhm.
that was a bummer because I like that was tough on my career.
Yeah,
But at the
for
same
sure.
time, going back to what you said, I could sleep at night knowing that I was within the policies that we had defined, and that the students were doing something that they were passionate about, that they were learning in additional ways that I thought were valuable, and that they were demonstrating that in an acceptable manner. So I can
Mhm,
sleep well at night knowing that I did that, and I don't have any shame or guilt about what I was doing because I believed that it was the right thing. And
mhm,
so, yeah, sometimes it does happen and you do get beat up in whatever arena, but it's worth it because you know you did the right thing. And I know that I provided a good experience for those students, and I'm proud of that, and I can and should be. But it goes back
mhm,
to that conviction of, what do you really believe? And if I was worried about my job, or I was worried about following the rules exactly, then I never
mhm.
would have given those students that experience. And so, with that point, Marcela, how do we figure out when it's right to break the rules and when it's right to just follow the policies as they are? And
Mhm.
this is a complicated question. So don't feel like you have to have the exact right answer, but we can talk more about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, I do think and believe that things happen for a reason. And, I don't know, maybe if you would have still been there and followed the rules, you wouldn't have created this amazing platform where we're connecting today, right? In terms of following the rules or not following the rules, I think sometimes rules are silly, and I think as leaders, we have to push back on them, especially when they don't make sense. And sometimes, like in your case, even when you're following the rules, because somebody has an unspoken rule, you're still going to break whatever rule that wasn't, or policy that wasn't articulated.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are living in some trying times. I mean, you're probably familiar with some of the headlines that we're seeing around banning books. Like, that's wild to me. The parent choice movement, where we're silencing some parents, or we have parents being utilized as pawns, like that's another headline. And there's just like these policies that don't make sense in education. There's these policies that don't make sense in healthcare. As a woman,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm feeling personally attacked on some of these policies. And so what do you do when you are at that intersection? And I think what you said earlier resonated with me, because I'm also a woman of faith. I think you have to go back to your values. We are all, I firmly believe, designed with a purpose. And you were given a set of parents and a set of experience in your life that informs who you are as an individual, as a leader. And you have to tap into those values, those experiences, to know what is true for you and what is not true for you. Now, that doesn't mean that your truth is somebody else's truth. So you have to be open to like dialogue on these matters. But nonetheless, when I have been at a crossroad of like, should I do this or should I not do this? It goes back to, what was I taught? What have I lived through? And what is going to give me peace in my being? And if I lead with those three things, oftentimes I find that I'm pretty confident in the decisions that I'm making.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I've been toying with this idea of truth, and I think of it as capital T truth and lowercase t truth. And when people say my truth and your truth, they're talking about the lowercase t truth, which is, that's right for you. That's what you understand. That's what you are convicted about and are sure about. And that's totally appropriate. And there are other things that are capital T truth that everybody in the society needs to agree upon. And if we don't all agree upon those things, then the only possible outcome is chaos and despair. And so those capital T truth things are much smaller than what a lot of people think your truth and my truth is. They think that my truth is everybody has to agree with me, and that's not the case. And we can disagree on a lot of things. And by being aware of that and by thinking about it, we have the opportunity then to say, is this a big T truth or a little T truth? And if it's a little T truth, then we can have a disagreement and we can go on our way. Mm-hmm. But if it's a big T truth, then we need to be in agreement and know. And to make a really extreme example, abusing kids, that's a big T, bad thing to do. Yep. We all have to agree on that. And if we don't, then we're not going to be able to protect the most vulnerable among us. And that is wrong. So when those questions come, we need to be able to say, no, that's a big T truth. We don't harm kids. And somebody may say, well, I don't think that doing this is harmful. And, then we can have a discussion about it. Sarcasm with middle school students, for example. I don't think it's appropriate, but that's not a big T truth. That's a little T truth. I'm not going to be sarcastic with middle school students because I don't think that they're emotionally prepared for that yet. High school students, that's a different story. They understand things. They're more developmentally prepared for that. But middle school and younger, that's just not, I'm not going to go there. But that's my little T truth. Someone else may think that it's totally okay to do that. And I can have a conversation and disagree, and we could talk about it. And as a principal, I can even discipline them for it. But that's going to be a harder one than, physically hurting a kid. Yeah. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add the research, for the little t truth, I think, and I speak about this in my book. Yuri Brofenbrenner's ecological system theory talks about like how we develop as humans. And I feel like it gives us a great framework that helps us understand that we all just have different life experiences. And so what's true for me may not necessarily be true for you. And, that book goes into a lot of detail around human development, but there's like an infographic that kind of shows you that there's multiple interested parties in one's life, and if you interface in one which way with one group versus another group, like it can completely alter like your life experiences. For example, just to ground the idea, like if your family is not your traditional, or what is considered as a traditional mother and father, and you're raised by grandparents, right? Your life experiences are going to be different than those of that family unit, or if you were raised by the foster care system. So these inform those small truths. Now, when you're talking about these big truths, you can also apply that framework, if you will, because we know, I think, that we all have the foundational elements as human beings. Like we all have the same organs, we all have blood running through our veins, we all have a brain, like we all have family, like all this stuff. And to coexist on earth together, we have to follow some basic truths. And I think those truths, right, to some extent, and I say some extent because some of them are questionable, but to some extent are driven by some of the policies that help us kind of reconcile our varied small truths into like, oh, it's true that, you can't have two green lights going at an intersection because they're going to crash. It's true that they're going to crash, right? So similarly, in things that we do, we have to be able to agree that these big truths can impact the way we coexist. And, I say that some of them are questionable because if we can't agree on them, then that's where that chaos comes. And so I think to resolve for that, we have to have communication. And it goes back to that identity and being willing to connect with people of like, well, tell me about who you are and what you believe in. And here's what I believe in and why I believe in this. And you can start with small truths but get to big truths so that you can have shared language and at least a shared agreement that we're going to operate in what is best for the group of individuals or a set of individuals.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Who is the person that you cited about that theory of development?
Yuri Brofenbrenner. His book is called his theory is called the Ecological Systems Theory Model. And 1978, I believe, is when he.
Well, I'm just going to look that up real quick because that's something that I did not know about.
Yeah, I use his work a lot to really help people ground on what my lived experience is, right? That's my truth. And then also helping people see like there's this bigger truth in a society of like human development. And in the model, he talks about the innermost system, which is the microsystem. And he says these are the groups of people that are closest to children and can impact them. And for me, my lived experience was because I had educators, families, and communities working together, then I was able to, and my family was able to cycle out of generational poverty, and I get to live my wildest dreams.
Yeah. All right. Well, according to the one I found, it's 1977. So,
oh, thank you for correcting me. I'm gonna have to go back, but
yeah.
1977. See, that's a truth, right? Like you can't change it, but I just did. So,
yeah.
And
I'm totally teasing because I'm impressed that you were that close. But the thing that's really fascinating here is we have these ideas of how humans develop and we're pretty sure. But what I like is that they're called theories and they're not called exact because people develop differently and their experiences are different. And we can fit people in categories and in general things. But then the reality is that every single person, even siblings, even twins, have a unique development that exists. And this, going back to what we were talking about before with the testing, is I recognize that every individual is unique and we have to treat them that way in our educational system. And two kids could be sitting next to each other and get totally different things out of the same lesson. In fact, people are going to listen to this podcast episode and they are going to get drastically different things from each other. And that is okay. And that is the beauty of each of us being unique individuals. And I just want to thank you for this great conversation, because this has been awesome. And I've really enjoyed chatting with you. And I hope that we can stay connected and talk more, and maybe have you come back on and talk about more specific things to what you're doing.
I would definitely love that.
Introduction.
And I'm going to email you, because I was one who started a podcast and that did probably 10 or 12. And I'm like, oh, now I'm glad we're connected, and I'm going to reach out. But there's so much to talk about. And I'm really grateful that you took time to speak with me today as well.
Yeah. So my last question is, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you? We talked about a lot, but just one thing, narrow it down.
Yeah. Be themselves. Like, just be themselves and show up as themselves inside the schoolhouse. And they will know that they've done that. And there's evidence of that when people know something about them. So if this week, perhaps folks don't know that they have a dog, they're dog lovers, share that with your teachers, share that with your students, share that with your families, or perhaps they don't know what you're reading or things like that. I would say be yourself. I think that's the best version of leadership, is being you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And want to give encouragement to people who are afraid to do that. You can do it, and it is worth it. How would you like people to connect with you, Marcela?
I am on all the socials except TikTok. And yeah, you could just connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, or Google my name, and you can go onto my personal website, marcelaandres.com. So there's many ways. If you want to connect with me, you can.
Excellent. Okay. And we've got links to all of that in the show notes at transformativeprincipal.org, and a link to Yuri Bronfenbrenner's paper toward an experimental ecology of human development. All right. Thank you so much, Marcela. This was awesome chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jethro.
This episode was edited by Gage Sanderson.